Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Just Ask Jen, our financial town hall for tonight. And our topic is budget planning for the fiscal year 25 budget cycle. And I'm going to ask my colleagues over here to introduce themselves. I'm Jennifer Wagner, so I'm Jen.
And you. Who is Jen?
Yeah.
She's the.
I'm Jen. I'm sorry. I am the Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer for Cincinnati Public Schools. Going on my 9th year of being the treasurer.
You're 20-something.
30th with the district. 30.
We don't have it. Anyway, I'm Kareem Moffitt, CPS board member.
Eve Bolton, board member.
And both these board members serve on the Finance Committee, along with Branding.
Finance and growth.
Thank you. Budget, Finance, and Growth. Old habits are hard to kill,
Okay.
right? So along with our third board member, Brandon Craig, who's going to join us online tonight. He's feeling a little under the weather, so we'll miss him. So tonight we're just going to talk a little bit about our budget process, how we begin to build the process, and what's a little bit different than in the past. So for those audience members who've been with us before, it's going to look a little bit different. Just wanted to start off by sharing that last year we focused on the 4 boxes on the left side of the screen. So sustainable staffing, high school transformation, a lot of investment in high school transformation, high quality instruction, and focusing resources. And so this year we're pivoting because we've just adopted a new strategic plan that has 5 pillars. I won't read them to you, but always focusing on student outcomes and our goals, board goals, and guardrails. Okay, so hit the next slide, please. So, and then if those of you who've ever been with us before, or you've been watching any of my PowerPoints in the past, you may recognize this slide. This is the Esser Cliff, and it is upon us. We are at the precipice of the cliff edge. And so we have to address in this budget cycle everything that's in the strategic plan, but also think recurring costs that are in the Esser plan. Next slide, please. So to give you a little bit of comparison, the column on the left is the fiscal 23 budget, the school year that we just ended. The 2 next columns is the current year. So we originally asked the board to adopt $607 million budget, but then we had to adjust it upward to 609.9 due to some new expenses in the preschool master agreement. And then the 2 right buckets represent what would happen in next year if we just added on the recurring items in the cliff of $86 million. And how that would, you can see how that budget is so much bigger than the one before it. So we have to take steps to get back to a balanced budget. And this year, the draft forecast is around $606 million. The current year budget, 609. So there's not a lot of room to add new things back in. Next slide. So we have some choices to make, difficult choices to make, right? And why is this important? So what these 2 blocks are showing you is the dark bar on the left-hand side represents our annual revenues forecasted. The gray ones represent our estimated expenditures. The graph at the top shows you how we've been traditionally moving towards our revenues and expenditures. You can see recently our expenditures have been higher than our revenues, and so the yellow line represents our cash balance. And you can see how that cash balance is eroding over time as long as we're spending more of the money than we're bringing in. However, we agreed last week to go back to creating a budget that equals our annual estimated revenues. So that's the chart on the bottom that shows you the difference between what happens with our cash balance when we spend within our annual resources. Any questions to that point?
But
it's just I'm just trying to share the message that we have to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars, and that we've spent into our cash reserves a little bit in order to fund some strategic initiatives and to help go back to a world without pandemic. And so now we have some choices to make.
I think you do a really good job, Jen, of just explaining it. I don't know how many slides you have here. Seems like a lot, but you just do a really great job of just saying it. Like, you know what? The budget was this. One question people ask is, why do we have to cut 80 some million? And you showed it in a slide, but just tell me, like, why? You said it to me. I now know the short version, but why?
Well, because we'll run out of cash if we don't. So
How did we get here? So we got here because we had ESSER funds and ESSER money. We moved stuff from one account to another. Like, how did we get here?
yeah, so some of our expenses went up because of ESSER, and ESSER is paying, the grant ESSER is a separate pot of money, is paying for those things. And I keep using the nurses as an example. Pre-COVID, our budget was 1.4 million. And then with the student wellness money grant, it went up to 1.7 million. During ESSER, it went up at 8.8 million. And now we've got it back down to 5, and the city couldn't hire enough nurses. We tried to put a nurse in every building, but they couldn't staff them. And so we reduced the budget to the amount of bodies they felt they could staff for us, down to, I think it's 5.5 million this year. But we can't just add 5.5 million back to the general fund because the ESSER monies are going away and there isn't another funding source. So we have to decide if we want to keep the $5.5 million of nurses, what are we going to take away to make room in the general fund to pay that balance? Because we can't operate without money.
Right.
Have to make payroll. Right.
Right. So we had ESSER. ESSER, there's 3 ESSERs. Just for we're not going to go back to the whole thing, but just, you know, this is ESSER 3. This is the last year of that. It's almost over. It has to be spent, and you know that whole.
So yes, it has to be fully encumbered, which means committed by June 30 of 24, and those invoices have to be paid out by September 30 of 24, or the federal government will sweep the unspent monies.
Okay. So we had that. We had the nurses as an example in ESSER, and in part for due reason because of spacing requirements, you know, the COVID stuff.
Right.
And now we have to make a decision like, hey, we can't afford that. So that's just one example of ESSER.
Well, there's on the screen in front of you, there's a list of there's a list of items that are considered recurring and that we have to make decisions about. These two have the giggles tonight.
So we moved all this stuff out of the general fund into ESSER?
No, not all of it. Some of it was new because of ESSER, like the super subs, for example. Those are building subs that don't travel from building to building. Prior to COVID, we didn't have standard building subs tied to a building. They just had daily subs. They would sign up as people were absent, and they floated from building to building. Well, during COVID, we didn't want them spreading germs from building to building, so we created permanent building subs depending on how much enrollment they had. And so that's something that people have gotten really used to having.
Sure.
And it may not be a bad idea to keep it, but at what size? Trying to think of another example.
Well, people could attend school and in the workforce more often as we get farther away from the COVID experience.
Right.
I would say most people project that attendance in, both at school and at work should be better, actually even this year, but by the mid-year, than into the next year. The old trend should be coming back.
Right.
I mean, this
We
part
have
of the
been.
problem is the COVID, post-COVID era has almost as much demand on us as COVID itself did.
Right.
So hopefully those trends make it a little less important to have as many subs as we needed to have.
But we did put some things in general fund in ESSER to help us balance this year's budget because we knew we had to spend ESSER, so we didn't, and we needed to help balance the budget. So there was a little bit of both.
So we were being responsible. I just want people to understand.
Yes.
We were being responsible. We were just trying to use our ESSER funds because we have to, or else we'd have to send it back.
So I'm anticipating, because what I'm hearing from other school districts is they're not nearly as far along in the spend as we are. And typically at the end of state and federal grant cycles, whatever's unspent, they sweep it and then they reallocate it back out. I don't know what's going to happen with the unspent ESSER dollars. There's going to be a lot, not by us. We have it to the penny, and we're monitoring it very closely on a regular basis to make sure You know, for example, with the super subs, if we have any vacancies, that money, that salary money goes unspent, we're going to reallocate it to something else before June 30 so we can make sure we get it spent out.
Are other large districts, the other big urban 8, are the other urban 8 districts as far along as we are too?
And I don't know, there's not been like a report or a study, but just in talking to people, there's a lot of concern about whether they're going to be able to spend it all. And then what are they going to do with the recurring cost? A lot of districts use the money to save jobs.
The other thing I'd also say, you mentioned that one of the reasons that we are where we are now, in part, is the ESSER piece. But part of it too is that we've had within 5 years, especially with the second one now, within 5 years, we've had 2 strategic plans that require more monies because of the strategic initiatives that go with it. Plus, there's been a teacher shortage, and for us to be competitive, especially in an urban district, we have upped the amounts of dollars regarding salaries
To
and
compete,
wages
yes.
to compete.
Yep.
And indeed, I've been on the board 16 years, and we've not had one major RIF that was district-wide.
Right.
That very few people can say that. And even during ESSER, during COVID, I should say, we were one of the few districts that did not take that opportunity to cut staff, that we actually found ways to maintain staff, which I think helped us, interestingly enough, get past the great shortage of teachers and other educators. I mean, we're still in it,
Right.
and we did suffer from it, but it wasn't as catastrophic as it was many of our neighbors were experiencing, because we kept staff during COVID, and a lot of districts didn't do that.
Right. Can we flip to the next slide, please? So in addition to the things that we are currently spending money on and the things that are in the cliff that we have to make decisions on, this is an example of items that aren't addressed in any of those things. So we have the ad hoc, we're anxiously awaiting the ad hoc committee report, which is addressing the use of our buildings and the possibility of maybe reconfiguring some of the district to deal with population shifts from when we did the FMP. You know, all 6 of our collective bargaining agreements are going into negotiations next month. And, you know, the board recently had a conversation about whether they should expand career education. And so if we're going to expand it, we got to figure out, you know, what to trade out to spend. Currently, we're spending about $9 million a year on career education, but the state funding formula only has 1.3 million, and the Perkins federal grant only has 1.5 million in it. We're using a lot of general fund to support career education. It's awesome, it's great, but if we want to grow it, we got to figure out where's it going to come from. The block in the center at the top was presented at the board workshop as there was legislation introduced to increase STRS, the district share of the retirement. It was going to be 0.5% per year to get from 14 to 18%. But we learned recently that the teachers were taken out of it, and it's just only applying to the police and fire. So that's why it's kind of grayed out and struck through. So, you know, whatever COLA gets negotiated in the collective bargaining agreements. We recently had a presentation on Public Safety Academy. If we're going to do that, we're in negotiations with the Cincinnati Preschool Promise on the new master agreement. So what are the results of that and what's that going to cost? And then about 8 weeks ago, the board had a fact finding on the facility repair plan, which Chief Burkhart, our Chief Operation Officer, presented a 5-year repair plan on the $1 billion facility master plan buildings. They're now, some of them are now 20 years old and need new roofs and boilers and chillers. And so we know that today's estimate is about $32 million over a 5-year period, a year, $160 million. But we all know with construction costs going up dramatically that in 3 years, those costs are going to change. So the board's, you know, we can't absorb that in the general fund, but it's a consideration we need to figure out how to pay for it, because it will affect the safety of our students. And then any other new initiatives that come out of the new strategic plan that we're not aware of yet. So those are just things that we have to figure out. Whatever they are, what are we going to take out of the general fund to pay for them?
If I were making that into a chart, or I were able to draw lines like I like to make myself understand as a visual learner, I'd probably make a connection between the ad hoc recommendations and the new initiatives. I think more so than the strategic plan.
Gotcha.
I think those are where the bigger costs would be. And then, very frankly, the career tech, we're going to have to do that. The public wants that, demanding it, and it's also helping our young people achieve. But the big ones down there, for like you just mentioned, the facilities repairs, the reality is what the administration did regarding that program. Those were things that are probably going to have to be a request of the public sometime in the near future, not next year, but soon. But we haven't really earned the right yet to make that case. But the big one there, the big ones are going to be the COLA and the union negotiations.
Mhm.
It seem to be the biggest. But again, this is only, you're talking only the general fund, right?
Well, things like COLAs could impact the other funds because the salary changes, right?
Right.
So I've just been keeping a running list of every time I hear a conversation where I think, oh, we might be needing a new investment. I'm just keeping a running list on, I'm calling it the cliff tracker. And so, but I just want to keep it in the forefront that these have to be holistic conversations.
Sure.
Because when you start getting into the weeds, you kind of lose the big picture there. And the big picture is we have $607 million to spend, and that's it.
Yes. So I have a
And the
question.
general fund.
Of the general fund, that's
Yeah.
right.
So I think I've asked you this question before, so I'm going to be a bugaboo only because people have asked this question of me. Are any of those items there able to be taken from ESSER currently? So we did allocate ESSER, and the board approved the ESSER budget, but it is, I don't want to say negotiable, but it can go back and be altered if needed.
We do revise it on occasion, and
So I specifically keep asking about facility repairs because
and we are.
I just wonder. I remember, and I use this example on the ESSER budget. It was like a $2 million pilot for badges, and I'm like, okay, it was down. It was down from 4 because it was 4, and I'm like, you know what? If it's between badges and facility repairs, I would love to, or even CTE expansion, I would love to see that $2 million be reallocated to something more significant in my mind. So my question is, and it's currently in ESSER, so is there something there in this graph that we could potentially use ESSER for that could be encumbered by June 30th and spent by, and I understand construction costs. I'm not talking about building a
Right.
new building. But
So we are. The facility repair plan, the reason it's 160 is because we're using the last bit of ESSER to get that started this year. So I don't remember how many chillers and boilers we're replacing. We're using ESSER this year, but it's in the ESSER budget. Everything else on that list is a future spend, and you won't be able to use ESSER for.
so when you say $12 million for facility repairs, it's not really $12 million if we're taking some of that from ESSER, or is it down to $12 million because we're taking some of that from
I
ESSER?
don't think I said 12 million. So facility repair is 32 million a year
Okay.
over 5 years. Each year
Each year.
for 5 years.
Okay.
But it would be higher had we not, we're using this year's ESSER to help get that started with a bunch of schools. I don't know, Mike, do you remember how many schools? Are you looking it up? 5 or 6 schools, I think, we're using to start doing the boilers and the chillers and the,
So I'm even thinking like, because I know when we had the fact finding facility repairs, it was like painting. It was like, is there an opportunity to relook at or revisit some of the facility repairs? And instead of spreading some of those things over 5 years, we're doing some of those things that need to be done and we're slated for maybe next year or the year after. Can we do those things earlier?
the people that are doing that work are already doing full-time work. So you have to, there's two issues here. The ESSER budget is already allocated out. So if you want to trade things, you're going to have to make some trade-offs, whatever those are.
Sure.
Right? I don't have a dog in that fight. I just have to keep track of the dollars.
Sure.
also, the people that are doing that work are already doing full-time work. So the work that they're currently doing that might be ESSER funded already, you're just trading the body, you know. Like the painting, for example, the painters are already doing painting all year long. They're already doing it full-time.
Mhm.
So adding more paint jobs to the budget might not get it done because you don't have enough bodies to get it done. So there's a human resource issue and a financial resource issue. That makes sense?
It does.
Okay.
It does if we're speaking only in-house. If we're speaking only in-house, yes, it does. So I don't know if we're bound by contract negotiations, and I don't know. I'm just wondering, is there a way that we could, with, for instance, like with CTE expansion, to me, that does tie into ad hoc because is there a way to, we've talked about CTE, and I realize we only have half the house in here. So I'm just wondering, and I've asked this question multiple times, can we revisit the ESSER budget and look at things that we thought at that time would be very significant and potentials with inclusive of pilots, et cetera, but perhaps we could get those things funded.
We can certainly
year.
revisit the ESSER budget. I don't know how far along some of those items, we might already be committed for the year in terms of the spend, but we can certainly revisit it. Yeah. Okay.
That's it.
Next slide. So when is all this going to happen? So traditionally, we start our budget process in October. We do the extract on student enrollment, and then we use that data to project next year's students by school, by grade, and by condition. And we feed that data into staffing formulas that are dictated by the collective bargaining agreement or state law or district policy. But because we have all these decisions to make, and at the board workshop, the board guidance was to push back the process and really begin in January because we need some time to get feedback and some decisions on some of the scope of what the cliff that's going to come back or what's the cost of some of those items in the previous slide going to be. And so that's the work that's going to happen in November, December. And then we're going to kick off the budget building process once the board, there's a workshop that's planned on January 21st, I believe. And so we're hoping we'll get final approval to say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. These are going to be our major investments. Then we can run the process from there. So we've met with the Sellers, president of the CFT, and worked out that staffing timeline so that we can catch, for her, that delays a month. And we think we could squeeze that time out and get caught back up. But we have to have a balanced budget by June 30.
Lots of work to do.
Yes, a lot of work to do. So we, Derek and Mike have been working hard on putting together, next slide, the budget roundtables. So we've learned a lot about public engagement, particularly when around finances. We really want to get feedback on priorities for people because we can't fund everything we're doing and everything that needs to come back. And so we're going to have some trade-offs and decisions to make. So we've set up a series, Derek and Mike set up a series of budget roundtables to get everybody's feedback, including the board.
I didn't know.
They didn't do just one session for board members. I think they
We're
want
going
you
to be attending every one of them.
or just participate in the ones that you choose to.
I did. This is the first time I've seen this schedule, so I like it.
Yeah, I think it just got sent out today. So yeah, brand new. So there was some of them will be in person, some of them will be virtual, sorry. In the meantime, they're working on doing some survey questions as well, so we can get some written responses. And in terms of the format and all that kind of stuff, they're in the process of designing that. You have a question?
I do have a question. I like the roundtable piece, and I do think that it would make sense for board members, not a forum or anything like that.
Right, that was my
to be
concern.
fully informed and representative. I think this.
And I
this
like
would
how you
be
did the goals and
very
guardrails
important.
feedback sessions. Yeah,
Exactly.
right,
Exactly.
right.
But I wonder on this. This looks for the most part internal roundtables.
Looks like it.
I can't really
Maybe
see
open
that far.
session
There's-
December.
Yeah, in December there's some open sessions.
This is being out in the public most recently, and also since we've been very transparent about the kinds of choices that we're facing, and appreciate that a great deal, so does the public. I think that the public is going to be taking part in this public budget process.
Great.
Mentioned to the treasurer, whether it's the health network or whether it's the green sustainability network, whether it's our athletic folks, whether it's our extracurricular, those folks that have a sense of the budget and indeed are part of our budget. I think we're going to, and I think it would be wise for the board to encourage it. We know we're going to get a lot of public interest regarding ad hoc proposals and changes and what have you, but I think you're going to have not an equal, but a similar amount of interest in whatever we're planning on eliminating or adding or whatever, whether it's something like the Public Safety Academy or whether it's career tech. I think the public is going to be participating more. So as you think about the roundtable, we probably need to be a little bit more outward thinking in addition to this really outstanding internal approach. And I think I think the idea too is to not so separate the school half from the central office half like we've been doing. Somehow
Okay.
a little bit more seamless thing. At least that's what you've said or the superintendent has said recently. But I would anticipate community involvement with this budget. Wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think, engagement is really tricky and tough because we offer engagement sessions for people to give their input, but we don't shape it where they can kind of ideate. We shape it where, what do you think about? And that's different. And so to me, there's not enough engagement on here for the community. There should be specific partner engagement for partners that are impacted by the budget. Vendors should be engaged. Partners should be engaged. And I just don't see that. Forcing them to come to a session that we're just offering for parents and what, I just think that doesn't feel to me like, hey, you're going to be impacted by this and we want to know what you think.
Right.
And so my suggestion would be that we need to, with intentionality, be real specific at people that are impacted by this budget specifically, and then potentially also, and I would even invite community councils to come. To your point, we really are going to need community support. And I really like how you said this, and I'm going to say it, but I want you to say it as well. We cannot have this much to cut and keep things the same. It's going to have to look different.
Music to my ears.
She said it very, 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 very much. You said it much more eloquently than I did off the cuffs. But we need to offer more than just 5 sessions. We need to offer more for principals. We need to offer more for like central office staff. I think we need to intentionally invite people to learn about what we're talking about, understand it, see where they are in it, and then help us shape where it's gonna go. And it's gonna look different. And I just believe if you tell people ahead of time and you can bring them up on the process, they will buy into what we're trying to do. But if you just tell them this is going to happen, that's where you meet resistance. And we just cannot meet resistance at this moment. We have to have all hands on deck. And that's why I was like, yeah, I like your slides, Jen, but just talk to me, because you do it so well and people learn from that. So I think this is great. I don't want to take anything away. You guys are awesome. You are rocking it, but just beef it up. And, the break times are good for people because they're all working during these hours, and we are too, but we want them to understand and take away that while they're offering this at a non-conventional time and also multiple times, so that they really must want my opinion, want me to be sure. And then I would track who's attending. So all of our partners, who attended, so that we can say, no, somebody from your office did come, and they do have it.
No, I really appreciate that feedback, and we would welcome community feedback. I remember I started the presentation last week by saying, and I think I said this to you when you first started talking about doing these town halls, was that I would spend hours upon hours doing these slideshows, and 2 people would show up, and it's frustrating because we really do want community input, and so we will take that feedback back to the team, and I want to give Ironetta Wright the shout out, because this was her idea. The roundtables were her idea. So we'll take that back and see what we can do with it.
I would just add that I don't know that the avenue to the community is through the administration.
Exactly.
The avenue to the community is going to, the role, so we don't have any confusion of roles,
Right.
is through the board. So the board in the process also needs to make better use of our board meetings and our committee meetings, no matter what the committee is, even policy. Policy ought to be looking at the policies that maybe have to change as we change the new vision of the district. I mean, everybody ought to be on this and in all the engagement pieces, whether they're structural or whether we use our LSDMCs more effectively at the site level to say, you know, we've got a big budget. And I take this back to the superintendent, but this budget, this opportunity that we have, because of necessity, is the biggest opportunity we've had to re-envision the district since the board 20 years ago re-envisioned it with the facilities master plan. This is the next big, it's that big, is what we're really talking about. And it really is about the budget. And we need to make use of this time more effectively. So the existing structures need to be dedicated to the budget.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for the feedback. So we want to open it up for some audience questions. Do we have any?
Yes, we do. I think this one was a little bit on when you were talking about career tech. It was a two-parter. When we say career tech, are we speaking to vocational education for students?
Career tech is partly vocational, but what my generation thinks of vocational is not career tech. So it's all vocational is career tech, but not all career tech is vocational.
That's a good way.
I guess is the best way to say it. But I know people want to see some of that vocational kind of skill jobs back as an opportunity, as well as us trying to emulate the 16 career clusters that the Labor Department in Washington recognize as career clusters. And frankly, we have a great fundamental start, but not as extensive as we need to have it for our families, because that's a great interest among our students for it. Is there a follow-up to that, or?
It wasn't on career tech, but I think you know, the difference between trades and pathways. I think that sometimes gets confusing for parents. The next one was more on building repairs. And when you were mentioning chillers and boilers are ESSER funded, this person's really not familiar with those terms and what exactly are chillers and boilers and how do they keep our children safe. You know, she said certainly from a cool and warm perspective, but maybe just explain ESSER, how it came about a little bit and where we are today with that funding line.
Okay, so ESSER is an acronym, and it stands for Elementary, Secondary Emergency Relief Fund, or something like that.
Something like that.
And it was federal funds that were provided to school districts to deal with pandemic-related issues. So at first it was, cleanliness and a lot of, I'm going to use another acronym, PPE, so personal protective equipment. And, we put up those glass blinders or binders, gloves, masks, all that kind of stuff, new cleaning machines and new disinfectants. And then slowly that it started to shift to how do we prepare for remote work? And then when we got into remote working, and then how to repair it, how do we get the learning loss back and get social distancing. And so those were all the allowable expenses for the ESSER funds. We are a district that is ripe with acronyms, so I apologize to that member that we're using too many acronyms. What was the second part of your question?
It was about chillers and boilers and how do those keep our children safe, but when you were speaking to like facility repair.
Yeah. So yes, those are related to the heating and ventilating, air conditioning. So the boilers keep our buildings warm, and the chillers help keep it cool. The biggest concern right now is on the roofs because they're 20 years old and they're starting to leak in places. And despite the maintenance plans that we've put into place, they're just aging, and so they need to be replaced. But that would be my biggest concern on safety, would be on the roofs.
I would add too, just I think in the last 48 hours, actually they've just released a major report about COVID and why it was so bad and how it could have been better. And one of the major things that they said was air quality.
Yes.
That if indeed we had spent more time, not us, but generally more effort on air quality, the numbers of people literally that got COVID probably would have been cut in half.
Wow.
And so they're really focusing on that. So I would say we spent a great deal of money
On air
on
quality.
air quality.
We did.
And very fortunately, with the vast majority of our buildings being relatively new, although we're tired of it, we say it's 20 years old now and we got to start fixing things. The fact that all of our students go to relatively new buildings was also a good preventive opportunity for us with COVID. But air quality is everything now.
And we did a session on ESSER last year.
Yes.
So it thoroughly explained it like a lot. So that was it September of 2020?
I don't remember, but they're all recorded and posted on our
Oh,
website
yeah.
if you go to the district's website, go to financial information, on the financial page, it shows you a link to all the financial town halls.
And I'll drop the link in on Facebook. So
That'd be
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
The next question is, what role does the superintendent, treasurer, and board have in the budget process? And how do your roles impact?
A great question.
That is
Does
a
one
good
of you
one.
want to tackle it first?
I'm gonna let you take that. I'll let you spearhead it, volley it up, and then I'll
Sorry.
come. Yeah.
Well, technically, the budget is the superintendent's budget, and that's how it's viewed, as the person in charge of the administration. The superintendent and the treasurer are independent of each other by law. You don't want the treasurer reporting to the superintendent or the superintendent reporting to the treasurer, but both report then to the board. The board's role is to make sure there is enough money. That's by Ohio Revised Code. That's our role. And it's the role then to communicate what the community wants, the priorities the community has. And then we hopefully have two professionals, the treasurer and the superintendent, that can work in a collaborative way to start to develop a draft budget. But it is not a budget. It is not done. It is not over until the board says that it is. And so that's because the budget actually is owned by the community, because the community is going to pay for it. Nobody else is going to pay for it. So it's a triumvirate, but most importantly, the community speaks through the board, and we have professionals like the treasurer and the superintendent developing a budget. This year, and I warned everybody I would say it, this year it's such a big opportunity, like the facilities master plan some 20 years ago, that the community will have an enlarged role in this budget, more so than in normal annual budgets.
The only thing I would add is that I think that the treasurer gets blamed a lot for things not working. So that treasurer told me we couldn't do this, and it's not the treasurer's budget per se. You know, the treasurer manages the money, the treasurer keeps things in line, but the academic piece is the responsibility of administration. And so some things are not your fault, and you get blamed for them quite a bit. So,
So the role of the treasurer in the budget process is that we set the budget target based on forecast and guide the process, make financial recommendations, and make sure that our fixed costs are budgeted so they're not being cut. You can't cut your debt payments, for example. You can't cut liability insurance. And so those are the things that we ensure that the process is financially compliant with the funds, the source of the funds, and to make sure that we are good stewards and stay within our means.
I think one of the challenges of this budget and previous budgets is we are being held accountable by the community and by the state. We spend a great deal of money on instruction and all things associated with instruction.
Mhm.
And the reality, there's the perception of the community, unfortunately, because of the report card, that we're not getting the outcomes that we should be getting. And that doesn't talk of this superintendent, it talks really about the last 4 superintendents, that there's that perception out there. I don't know why we believe all of a sudden the state is intelligent when it's about this report card versus everything else. They have no credibility with the community about most things, but all of a sudden they do about the test. But I think we really have to look at the instructional kinds of decisions we have to make, because there's a lot of money being spent and the community's not seeing the outcomes that it wants to.
So you're right. 80% of our general fund budget is spent either directly in the schoolhouse or in support of the school or the students. And so, yeah, you can't take the money out of central office anymore, because there'll be
But
no
we
central
will
office
try.
left.
We are going to look at that for
Okay.
sure.
More questions?
Sure. What happens if we aren't able to balance the budget?
The state will come down and take us over.
Yeah, that's not.
We'll
We
run
have
out of
to.
cash in next year. We won't be able to finish a year with payroll without cutting bodies. We'd have to go through a RIF. But what
What's a riff?
happens?
What's a riff?
I'm sorry. Good. Thank you. It's a reduction in force. It means layoffs. So what happens when we file the November forecast, if that forecast shows a negative cash balance in the current year or the 2 years after that, the Ohio Department of Education, if they still exist, I don't know, will send us a letter saying you have to fix your problem. And you can't just answer it by saying, oh, we're going to do a new levy, because they will let you use new revenue to balance your budget. You have to make spending decisions. And if you can't do that, they will come down here and tell you how to do it. And so all the things that aren't required by state law that we do above and beyond, they'll cut.
Like,
It'll be devastating. Well, for example, our class sizes are we don't, state that doesn't say you have to put a paraprofessional in the building, in the classroom when you reach a certain amount. They just say that class size is board policy, but they don't dictate assistant principals. Those are positions that we think are important to the operation of our building, so we fund them, and we created a formula and revise it over the years.
We will have a balanced budget.
Yes.
I mean, that's just the reality. We can't change that. We don't want to change that. And very frankly, when you talk about new money, we've gone 8 years, the last 16 years or so, we've had 8 years in between requests for new money.
That's correct.
And that's a remarkable achievement. So we're very, very good stewards of it. But the reality now is that what has built the district cannot continue to be. We have to envision a newer district because the financial constraints are growing, if you will.
That's correct.
And also the demands put on us by Columbus are growing. And so we have to re-envision ourselves. And that will do a good job, because we are and have been a great laboratory for innovation, and we will do this again.
I completely agree with you. I think that the state has put some pretty hefty restrictions around like CTE funding, et cetera, that people aren't aware of. And we need to do a better job of marketing how we are spending and what we're doing for CTE. So I think some of that is on our own district, but also after the pandemic, our kids and our families have different needs than they had before the pandemic. So the money is going away. However, the innovation, to your point, and the ability to really give our kids what they need in order to thrive and just excel and shine is there. We cannot do this by ourselves. We have to do this in collaboration with the state, the community, but grants partners. We just cannot be out here by ourselves thinking we're going to fix this. With a huge job of having to cut a significant amount of money, we need to reallocate and think differently. And I think that's what we're trying to do on a lot of different levels. We spoke about ad hoc, but I also would like to say it's ad hoc attendance elementary attendance boundaries. That committee does meet, but we are making some significant recommendations that will reimagine our district based on things that we've heard, and community input is super significant there too.
And like the facilities master plan, it will be a board-driven report, and you're going to have significant board support for most of whatever's proposed, because if you propose 10 things and you say no to 3, the other 7 that somebody wanted doesn't work. It's a house of cards, so to speak. And it's a very complete, comprehensive look at what we have to try to achieve by rearranging the district in some way.
And to be honest, we've spent 18 months doing this. It's not a quick process. It's nothing that we're doing without a lot of consideration and input from the community. Trying to stay high level because we have a committee member that keeps us there. But we've really been very intentional with wanting to reorganize based on the needs of the community and the pandemic and what would be best visioning for our students.
So given that timetable that we were looking at earlier, where does that fall in? Like, when would the unveiling of that report fall in?
We have it set for December the 4th, although that meeting, I think I can say the committee thinks we need our own day, not just an hour at a board meeting to talk about it. And we haven't had the opportunity for that, to get our own time to talk about it. But that was what we discussed at our last meeting, is that perhaps we just need to set a day in December that we can get it. Because right now it's slated for an hour at the board meeting.
And that's not acceptable. And it's quite likely that we need to almost have a kind of an unveiling, if you will, and discussion for the board. But you need a wider community unveiling, so it's not just certain schools coming in to advocate or having a heads up that others don't. So I mean, looking at your schedule, when would be the optimum time for ad hoc to present and know where the board is about most of it? Because it's not going to be something where the administration says, no, we're not going to do that. It's not going to be that anymore. There's going to be the board saying no. You're going to have to find where the biggest grade of consensus is on all of it to accomplish what's needed to be accomplished.
I guess tomorrow would be unacceptable.
I would love it.
Sooner better. The sooner the better.
That doesn't help.
Well,
When
Pin it
would-
down. Like what month? Clearly November is here. So would December work for you before the break?
Or does January or?
December would be better because it'll give us time to prepare for the next budget conversation. We can figure out how it works in, because we're going to have to cost it all out. So we need time to do that.
Well, we're kind of costing it out in our summation a little bit, in that this is not an ad hoc meeting. So we're thinking of something and we're asking you about a recommendation for pricing. So in our presentation, we're coming with those figures. So yes, it would have to have a bigger picture conversation in that, how does this fit into the broader picture? But we would hopefully drill down a number.
So are you thinking you're going to do like board presentation, community unveiling, getting more feedback, and then voting on it? Or is the December 4th the vote?
No.
Okay.
So it would be, well, if we could get the date moved, it would be great. I would love to have it on its own day. Right now, it does not. So it's an hour. I don't think we're going to be able to get a full presentation done in an hour. It's just not enough time for 18 months worth of stuff.
Sure.
So if we were to get our own date, let's just say 2 hours, we would present it, the board would get it, ask tons of questions. The administration has already done this in collaboration with you and the community. So it's not like we're presenting this and the administration hasn't seen it. This is a collaborative effort.
Mhm.
And so it would be question and answers to the board, the broader board, to say, hey, this is what we're proposing based on what we found in working with the administration and listening to the community. And then we would come up with more questions from that. I would anticipate the community is going to participate in the broad and the board unveiling.
It just occurred to me, maybe some of these budget roundtables could help with that feedback loop.
Sure, but I didn't know about these, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, at our meeting, because we would have mentioned them to
Right.
people, for people to come. I think that if we were to have, you said there's a work session in January for the board.
I think it's the 21st.
Even if we were to do our, like, listen to the community, you've got an open session January 3rd. If we were to present it maybe before that,
I think what Jen said is right. I think whatever December, whether it's that 4th and another day as well, or the very, very earliest we can do in January before the 20-something,
Mhm.
the board needs to buy this before it is presented to the community
Okay.
from a standpoint that it's the package. And we share with the community, not what we've already decided, but what we are already envisioning, or where there's some consensus. We're trying to achieve this, trying to achieve, you know what I'm saying?
So
Rather than,
before-
this is how we're going to do it.
Okay.
So I would think that the community piece would be in January, ideally.
Separate from the board.
Well, with the board, yeah, well, because we'll have a new board in January.
So are you saying we would unveil it to the board and the community? Because it has to be, I'm thinking it has to be an open public session.
Oh,
anyway.
yes, there's no
So-
question about that.
So they're
But I'm
gonna-
saying the audience that day would be, the first day is the board itself.
Okay.
And they will want to know, and we will want to hear what they have, and maybe there'll be tweaks and turns and
Okay.
twists. And then we come back with maybe another kind of thing that we actually start to show fully. Community will see it when the board sees it,
Right.
because we can't have private meetings, but I think you're looking at January for community meetings.
Okay. After all
I
of
think,
this.
well, I think everything we do better be somehow associated with the budget, obviously.
Yeah.
Even all the board committee meetings.
I'm with you. We're not doing anything in private. We are not calling each other. We are not doing any of that.
That's right.
Okay, let's hear from the public and with another question.
Yeah. Is there potential for further revenue increases? State adjust their funding formula.
So the state does adjust the funding formula, the state adopts a biennium budget. So we are in the first year of this biennium budget, and they're tweaked the funding formula, but it's based on our enrollment. So as enrollment goes up, we get more money. If enrollment goes down, we get less money. New revenue would come from, I'm assuming they were thinking of new money levy, a property tax levy. And so the board hasn't started those conversations yet. We do have a renewal coming up in November 25. Yes, November 25, and that's the $48 million 5-year levy that has the $15 million set aside for preschool expansion. And as we know, both organizations, Cincinnati Public School and Cincinnati Preschool Promise, have really outgrown that $15 million set aside, and so we have to figure out what to do with that.
Jen, can you talk about what other sources of revenue the district uses as well? Because
Sure.
levy is heavy, but like we also have other sources.
Right. Aside from ESSER, we get about $70 million in state and federal grants. Those grants are very restrictive and the purpose of the grant. So for example, IDEA B is a grant for students to support students with disabilities. And so the monies can only be spent on the students with disabilities. Title I is about a $22 million grant, and that's for disadvantaged youth. And it has to support instruction. And so there's rules that you can't use any of that money to spend on administrative costs. It has to be on improving student instruction.
Is that the
Um,
one where you can't spend that money on something that would be covered in the general fund?
So some of the rules have supplement supplant rules. So the state and federal grants are supposed to supplement what you're already doing. And so if you're doing something in the general fund, then whatever title monies that you're using has to lay on top of that. So for example, you can't use Title I's for our math curriculum because non-Title I schools use that math curriculum. That would be a supplant. And you can't say, like in our situation, we're going to take all the principles out of the general fund and put them in Title I. Because that would be, so you can't replace what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does.
Okay.
But I would add too, if we could, obviously we have to have better accountability for the use of our grants, as we have discovered most recently. So there's that, and that's not general fund, but it impacts the general fund and what have you. But also we can divest ourselves of some of our properties. I mean, you cannot cut enough out of this budget to meet these targets. You're not only going to have to change the way you do business, but you're also going to have to look at more revenue. And I'm very, very committed to the certificates of participation. And I feel very strongly that even to position ourselves with the community for a levy down the road for permanent improvement, we have to find a way to maximize the use of the current facilities. And that means also deal with our overcrowding in some of our schools that we can call them successful, where there's schools that people are choosing to go to in record numbers. And so there's many, many ways that we can think in terms of additional revenue, but not a levy
So
right now.
let me caution you, the certificate of participation is not really an additional revenue, it's a borrowing.
It's borrowing.
And so it's a way to finance projects. But the difficulty
money.
is
That we have to pay for.
you have to pay for, but you have to carve it out of your general fund spending, so it makes that gap bigger,
Great.
right?
But if you have to carve out, what's the cost of, let's say, $50 million of COPS? What does that cost your actual budget the first year?
I'd say it's probably about $5 to $6 million of
So you might
annual
get
lease payments.
$50 million to do something that may need doing, depending upon what we all decide. And it would cost us $6 million
A year for many
a year.
years.
Yes.
So I just want to help out the community. We've thrown another acronym out here, COPS, which is Certificate of Participation.
Correct.
And that's where you borrow money against, I'm going to let you explain it.
So it acts like a capital lease, right? So you borrow money and you use that property as leverage, collateral, so to speak. And then you just make lease payments until you repay the debt. It is attractive to school districts because it doesn't count towards your official debt limits. So there's rules about how much debt a district can take on. And so you just can't go out and borrow your way out of this money either because you have to make your debt payments, right? So
Previously, what have we used COPS for?
So the last COPS we did in 2018, we purchased Mercy and renovated the building for Gamble Montessori High School.
Oh.
And we used the money to renovate the Clifton area neighborhood
Oh.
school, or CANS, another
Two
acronym.
schools?
Previous COPS were used to help fund the facility master plan.
Oh. That's why I
We
like
got 2 minutes left. One more question?
Oh, good.
So we talked a little bit about added, forecasts and revenue. So this obviously is on the cuts. Are there any board policies that could be changed to reduce the highest cost items? Can we reduce central office spending? And are there discretionary funds to cut? Those policies to reduce the highest cost items, central office spending, and discretionary funds.
I'm not aware of any policies that would drive the cost of the budget. What?
The discussion about fees.
That would go the other way.
Yeah.
So the policy committee and the finance committee are discussing eliminating students paying fees to participate in things or for supplies, to help reimburse for supplies. So that if they were to adopt that policy, that would drive the budget up, not down. But so that would be one example. What was the second part?
Could be transportation.
It was
too,
about,
yeah.
policy that could drive the highest cost items down.
Yeah, so Ms. Bolton reminded me about the transportation policy. and eligibility would certainly change, because state law requires us to transport up to 2 miles, or 2 miles of eligibility, and K to 8. And so we go way beyond that in the district.
I would add, because I've heard this term used, the district overnight could save millions and millions and millions of dollars if we only went by state minimums
That's correct.
in everything. But our community demands more than that and deserves more than that. But if you really wanted to, and that's why we want to avoid losing local control. We don't want the state to come in and get us down to state minimums.
Right.
But you could overnight, we could come back tomorrow almost and say we've made these cuts by going to state minimums.
Even neighborhood schools, we could.
I think we're out of time. We're done. Flip the slide one more time, because I'm going to advertise for the next town hall.
Were there any more questions, Mark?
So the next Just Ask Jen Financial Town Hall was November 29th, and we'll be talking about the 5-year forecast, levies, and bonds.
So before we cut out, though, I do want to say congratulations on a successful presentation in San Diego. Was it
Thank
San
you.
Diego?
Thank you.
Jen had an opportunity to present about these Just Ask Jen Financial Town Halls that started last year, and they have been a success across the nation. People are looking at these, and so I'm super excited for you. Congrats.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a lot of fun. We got a lot of great feedback, too. So, any closing comments?
None for me, but thank you.
Just attend attend the committee meetings, because that's where we're talking about things more in depth. Board Member Bolton keeps us here for 5 hours, provides lunch, and we talk about the budget growth, and budget finance and growth committee, and ad hoc. So thanks a lot.
All right. Well, thank you, and good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.